Morning, Harris.
Morning.
I've noticed recently there's been a lot of chat in the press around interest rates and how interest rates have been rising and they're linked to inflation. It got me thinking that maybe a lot of people don't actually understand why interest rates rise and what inflation is. So I thought it'd be a useful thing to have a chat about.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's clearly very topical. A lot of people might not want to put their hand up and ask the question. So, what is inflation?
Yeah, it's really actually quite basic. It's simply the cost of goods and services in the UK today versus their cost a year ago. So what happens is the Office of National Statistics, every month, they check the prices of around 700 different things. Those things could be as simple as milk or bread to expensive things like holidays or cars or houses. And then what they do, they compare the cost of them this month to the cost of them a year ago.
Okay.
And the difference in the cost is essentially inflation. If those things costed 1.1 million today versus them costing £1 million a year ago, the difference in those things is the inflation percentage, which in that case will be 10%.
So, when inflation is high, things cost more. But to combat that, they make borrowing more expensive. How is that fair?
I think it's a great question. A lot of people assume that when things cost more, then making debt more easily available or cheaper is the fairest way about it, because things cost more, so you should have access to more money. But it's actually the opposite. It's the Bank of England's job to control inflation. If you think about inflation, it's the increase of costs and goods from last year to this year. So if inflation's out of control, it becomes very expensive for the public to actually buy things. So the Bank of England's main job is to keep inflation at around about 2%. That's seen by economists as slow and steady growth, which is not out of control, but keep things moving in the right way. Inflation's currently 10%. So to combat inflation, the Bank of England only have a couple of different levers. The main lever is interest rates. If you think about the costs of anything, it's all based on supply and demand, really. If you think about holidays, they're more expensive during summer holidays where there's more people that want to go on holiday, and so holidays go up, supply and demand. There's less demand, there's less supply, and there's more demand. And that's how interest rates work. Inflation's high, and so what the Bank of England's looking to do is to encourage people to save money by increasing interest rates so they don't go out and buy things, and discourage people from borrowing money to go and buy things. And that reduction in consumers buying things leads to the demand for things reducing, and so inflation curbing itself and moving back to a more natural way. If you think about it, PlayStation 5s, you've probably seen them on eBay over the last 12 months, and they go on eBay and they're 3 times as much as they cost in the shop. Again, that's really supply and demand driven, that there's not enough PlayStation 5s made, and a lot of people want them.
Yeah.
And so it's a very similar thing. High interest rates encourage people to save, and that's really the essence of how the Bank of England tackles inflation.
Okay, so why is that important for me?
Well, there's a lot of talk at the minute around the cost of living crisis, and the cost of living crisis is basically come about due to 2 things. First of all, inflation of 10% means that everything you buy today on average is 10% more expensive than it was a year ago. So you buy a loaf of bread and it's 10% more expensive than it was. If you buy a pint of milk, it's 10% more expensive than it was. At the same time that everything costs 10% more, salaries and wages are going up by less than 10% on average. So there's a lot of pay freezes that people see that are happening at the minute, or small increases in wages. And if those increases are less than the increase in inflation, it creates a gap where you can actually afford to buy less things today than you could a year ago. And that's compounded by the fact that if you need to borrow money for things such as buying a home or buying a car, anything that requires any kind of borrowing, that borrowing's increased as well. So you've got increasing cost of goods and services through inflation, an increase in interest rates, so your borrowing costs increase, and wages aren't increasing at the same level. That's why it's important to every man on the street.
Okay. So when it comes to our clients, how does the rise in interest rates affect them?
In really simple terms, it means the cost of borrowing increases for them. There was recently a 0.5% increase to the Bank of England base rate. And what that means is for every £100,000 a business borrows, it costs them £500 a year more in interest to service that loan or overdraft. Now, £500 sounds a lot, but you have to realise that the interest rates have actually gone up by 1.65%. So they've gone from 0.1 to 1.75% over the last 12 months. That means for every £100,000 a business borrows, they're actually paying £1,650 more for that money in interest today than they were a year ago.
What would you advise businesses to do?
Well, for a lot of businesses, borrowing money is a must. If you think about their working capital cycle, businesses often need to pay for wages or for supplies, materials, before they are paid by the customer for the goods and service they provide. That means that customer needs to borrow money to pay the wages before they get paid. So things like overdraft or invoice finance are both commonplace with regard to businesses nowadays. Before looking at finance, though, I definitely recommend a business looks at cash flow efficiencies within their business. That working capital cycle can be improved by looking at their creditors. Can they stretch out the creditors a little bit further than what they currently do? Looking at their debtors, can they squeeze their debtors to get paid more quickly than they currently do? Both of those things mean that they have to borrow less money, or borrowing money could disappear altogether. Now, like I say, a lot of businesses have to pay wages before they get paid, so they do have to borrow money. And in that case, I would look at two key things. The rise in interest rates means it's really important that businesses access the best form of finance for them. That could be a loan in some cases, or it could be an overdraft or invoice finance, or it could be asset finance. There are so many different types of finance these days that it's really important that a business finds the right type of finance that fits the reason that they're borrowing. If they're spending money on capital expenditure, as an example, buying an asset finance is a great way to do that because you pay the money back over the lifetime of the asset. If you're borrowing for working capital, a loan quite often is the wrong way of doing it because you have to pay back both the interest and the capital is quite expensive, and so that means it harms cash flow. So I'd be definitely looking to work with the right type of advisor who can find the best options for them in those instances. I would also look at planning, and over the next 12 to 18 months, if a business can see that they're going to need finance to finance the opportunities that lie ahead, then whilst interest rates have gone up recently, all economists are predicting that they're going to continue to rise sharply. So essentially getting in today at today's interest rates and fixing those rates could be more beneficial than borrowing money in 12 months down the line at those interest rates, which could be a lot higher. Thanks everyone for taking the time to watch this video. If you want to learn any more about inflation and how they're linked to interest rates, please feel free to get in touch with either Harris or myself. And if you've got any suggestions for any other future videos, anything that you think's topical or people aren't sure about, feel free to post a comment and we'll try and incorporate them in future videos. Thank you.